It was the 20th century's first genocide. An estimated 100,000 ethnic Herero and Nama people died at the hands of German colonial troops in present-day Namibia between the year 1904 and 1905. For a long time, Berlin refused to call the killings a genocide, but that changed back in 2015. Germany and Namibia are now in talks about a joint declaration on the massacre.
They say history does not begin with violence. It begins with a misunderstanding so deep, a desire so hungry, and a belief so unchallenged that destruction becomes inevitable. Long before the first shot was fired in Namibia, the blueprint for genocide had already been drawn in ideas, in borders, in the hunger of an empire that believed the world was its inheritance. This is the story of the Herero-Nama genocide and how man's search for glory affected thousands of generations. Before the maps carved Africa into possessions, before treaties written in foreign languages claimed ownership over what they barely understood, the land known today as Namibia was a world with its own order. The Herero lived across central and eastern Namibia, cattle herders whose entire worldview was built on livestock, lineage, and land. Cattle were not simply wealth, they were identity, power, spirituality, and inheritance. A man's dignity was measured in the strength of his head. To lose cattle was to lose a part of oneself. To the south lived the Nama, a Khoi-Khoi-speaking people, agile, mobile, politically sophisticated, and skilled in desert survival. Their clans formed alliances and rivalries long before Europe knew the name Southwest Africa. Communities traded, negotiated, fought, married, and adapted without ever imagining that a foreign empire thousands of miles away would soon redraw their walls. There was no single kingdom to conquer, no centralized government to bribe, no monarch to sign away people. This would later become the root of Germany's strategy: divide, isolate, fragment, then claim. Germany entered the colonial race late. Britain had taken the Cape, Portugal held Angola, France and Belgium had already divided Central Africa. Germany wanted its share, not for humanitarian missions or trade relationships, but for imperial legitimacy. A new empire required land, subjects, and proof of power. German missionaries arrived first. They built churches, opened schools, and documented tribes. But their most important function was political. They softened the ground for colonial rule. By the 1880s, Germany officially declared German Southwest Africa after a series of coerced protection treaties engineered by the trader-turned-agent Adolf Ludwig. These treaties granted Germany what the Herero and Nama never intended: sovereignty. The Herero believed they were agreeing to mutual protection. Germany believed it had acquired a colony. Two different readings of one document, and the foundation of all the future conflicts. With the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, Europe formally divided Africa amongst itself. Germany was now internationally recognized as the ruler of Southwest Africa. Land, the basis of Herero life, became the first target. German settlers, arriving in increasing numbers, claimed vast tracts of fertile land. They fenced grazing areas, they diverted water sources, they used legal systems unfamiliar to Africans to declare land ownerless and therefore available for seizure. What had been communal land became private property overnight. The Herero were pushed into narrower territories, disrupting grazing routes that sustained their cattle. Their economic freedom began to shrink, and with it, their political power. Land loss was not an inconvenience, it was the first stage of annihilation. Germany understood the Herero mind. They knew cattle were the people's strength. so they attacked the cattle economy, slowly, legally, and strategically. German traders imposed unfair prices. A Herero cow was bought for a fraction of its value. Guns sold to Africans were priced with hidden interest, trapping families in debt. When debts could not be paid, cattle were confiscated. When cattle were insufficient, land was seized. When land was insufficient, labor was demanded. And debt became a colonial weapon, a silent weapon. In the 1890s, rinderpest and smallpox devastated cattle and human populations. While Africans suffered, Germans seized weakened communities' land under the pretext of assistance. The German administration imposed hot taxes and cattle taxes. Taxes could only be paid in cash, but cash was scarce, so the Herero was forced into labor. Each policy looked administrative on paper, but together they formed a chokehold. The Herero were being economically suffocated long before the first bullet was fired. Germany built its colony on the foundation of racial ideology. Africans were classified as subjects, not citizens, a legal category that removed their rights, mobility, and autonomy. Africans needed passes to travel. Without passes, they were arrested. This ensured control over movement and labor supply. Railways, farms, mines, all run on African labor obtained through coercion, debts, arrests, and fabricated charges. German settlers were granted almost total immunity. Whippings, beatings, and executions were reported with alarming frequency. Complaints by Africans were ignored. The colony became an experiment in racial rule. During the 1890s, the colony was run by German officials who held deep contempt to Africans. They believed order could only be established through fear. Governors like Theodore the practiced a divide and manage strategy, punish resistance harshly, reward collaboration, encourage intertribal suspicion, maintain German supremacy at all costs. The Herero, led by Chief Samuel Maharero, tried diplomacy for almost a decade. They wrote letters, they requested protection from settler abuses, they proposed peaceful coexistence, but Germany misread their patience as weakness. By the early 1900s, tensions reached breaking points, and several events accelerated the collapse. Increasing land expropriation, sexual abuse, murder of Herero settlers, disrespect towards chiefs. No genocide begins suddenly. It builds quietly, then detonates through a trigger event. In early 1904, that trigger arrived. Herero laborers, angered by years of mistreatment, killed several German settlers in isolated incidents. Word spread rapidly across the colony. For Germany, these deaths became the justification they had been waiting for. The colonial imagination transformed isolated acts of resistance into a planned uprising. On January 12, 1904, the Herero rose in coordinated resistance. They targeted military stations and supply lines, not civilians. Contrary to German propaganda, there was no campaign to kill all whites. Maharero himself issued orders that the women, children, missionaries, and English must be spared. This was not genocide. It was a political revolt against land theft, humiliation, and exploitation. But Germany would respond with something far more extreme. Governor Liu attempted negotiation. He had lived in the colony long enough to know the Herero grievances were legitimate. But Berlin wanted a demonstration of power, not compromise. A new empire needed a victory to assert itself among European powers. So Germany sent reinforcements, thousands of soldiers, artilleries, and special units. And then they made a decision that would change African history forever. They replaced Governor Liutwen, who performed negotiations with a man who believed Africans must be crushed, not spoken to. A man who openly advocated racial extermination. His name was General Lothar von Trotha. Von Trotha did not come to negotiate. He did not come to restore order. He came with a single mission: destroy the Herero as a people. His reputation preceded him in East Africa and China. He had already demonstrated one principle: war meant annihilation. On arrival, he dismissed all peace proposals, he dismissed diplomacy, he dismissed local administrators. He brought with him a philosophy that saw Africans not as opponents, but as obstacles. An obstacle must be removed permanently. Von Trotha reshaped the military campaign into something more than war. He centralized command, he restructured troop movements, he planned to trap them in the Omaheke Desert. His goal was not victory, his goal was extermination, and in August 1904, he enacted that plan. On August 2nd, 1904, Von Trotha issued one of the most chilling documents in colonial history. The Herero are no longer German subjects within the German frontier. Every Herero, armed or unarmed, will be shot. Women, children, elderly, civilians, all defined as targets. This was not a battlefield order. It was a blueprint for genocide. It declared an entire people illegal, alive. His words removed any ambiguity about intent. This was not a conflict. It was annihilation written openly and proudly. The decisive confrontation came at Waterberg in August 1904. The Herero, thousands of families, gathered there hoping for negotiations or safe passage. Instead, they were encircled by German forces on three sides. The fourth side, the east, was left open, not by accident, but by design. Von Trotha drove them towards the Omaheke Desert, a wasteland with no reliable water. Machine guns and artillery hammered the Herero positions. Families fled, cattle were scattered, and thousands died in hours. But the true devastation would come after the battle, in the desert. Driven eastward, the Herero entered the Omaheke, a dry, vast, merciless space. Germany closed wells, poisoned watering points, stationed troops at borders to prevent escape, blocked routes into Bechuana land, which is now modern-day Botswana. The desert became a weapon, silent, clean, deniable. Men collapsed first, then children, then the elderly. Women who carried babies also died, with babies in their arms. Entire families vanished into sand and heat. This is where the Herero population broke. They were not killed in battle, they were killed in tests. Thousands, tens of thousands. This was the collapse. Genocide does not require fire or steel. Sometimes it requires intention, geography, and silence. The Omaheke Desert was not an accident in German campaign. It was the central instrument. Von Trotha understood two facts. The Herero depended on cattle, and cattle depended on water. Remove water and the people collapsed without the empire lifting a finger. After Waterberg, German forces did not pursue the Herero to negotiate or to capture. They pursued to ensure no return. This is the distinction that marks genocide. German troops sealed western access routes. They set up patrol lines. They intercepted, scattered survivors, and executed them on sight. They monitored wells and filled many with carcasses or poison. There is nothing ambiguous about these tactics. It was extermination through environmental suffocation. Those who fled eastward encountered a desert that offered no shade, no shelter, and no mercy. The bodies found years later were so scattered across the sands that German officers described it as a silent graveyard stretching beyond sight. Infants died first, then the elderly. Those in between walked until the heat reclaimed them, and the collapse was total. Empires often denied their crimes. German administrators did not. They reported the strategy clearly. They wrote it in letters, in telegrams, and in official papers. We must finish them off. No male Herero should be allowed to live. Those who return will be shot. These statements were not emotional excess. They were operational instructions. German officers debated efficiency, not morality. They discussed whether it was preferable to kill survivors on sight or allow them to die in the desert naturally. Killing used ammunition, but the desert used nothing. In one report, a commander wrote, "The sun and the lack of water will do their work." This is how genocide is executed by modern states, not only with violence, but with paperwork and manipulation. Genocide is not only physical destruction, it is the destruction of a people's structure, identity, and continuity. The Herero society was anchored in clan hierarchy, sacred cattle systems, ancestral land, generational leadership, and oral transmission of identity. All five collapsed simultaneously. When the cattle died, identity was fractured. When land was lost, lineage scattered. When elders perished, memories were evaporated. And when clans broke, the society hollowed out. The desert did not only claim bodies, it claimed the continuity of a nation. The Herero who survived did not return as a unified society. They returned as remnants. Survival is not victory, survival is debris. By late 1904, even the German government in Berlin began to negotiate the enormity of what was unfolding. Some officials feared international backlash. Missionaries reported catastrophic loss. A few politicians raised concerns about the destruction of an entire race. But von Trotta dismissed all objections. He told Berlin that leniency was weak. He insisted that extermination was the only way to secure German rule. Berlin did not stop him. They issued minor instructions, avoided direct confrontation, and allowed events to continue. Their hesitation cost tens of thousands of lives. Colonial economies always prioritizes land over people. The empire needed stability, not justice. Von Trotta was eventually recalled, but by then, the foundation of the genocide was complete. The Herero population had been reduced from an estimated 80,000 to fewer than 15,000. No apology from Berlin could reverse that outcome. Genocide does not end with one group, it expands to the next. While the Herero were being driven into the desert, the Nama watched closely. They saw the patterns: broken treaties, land seizures, violence without consequence, forced labor, racial laws tightening each year, military reinforcements increasing, and von Trotta's extermination philosophy taking root. They realized that negotiation had no meaning under German rule. Chief Hendrik Witbooi, a respected leader and strategist, understood the situation with cold clarity. He had once allied with Germany to maintain relative autonomy. Now he saw that alliance as a trap. In October 1904, while Herero survivors were still fleeing into the desert, Witbooi issued a declaration of resistance. The Nama War had begun. Germany responded to the Nama exactly as it had responded to the Herero, with overwhelming force and racial absolutism. Von Trotta issued a second extermination order. Every Nama found within Germany territory will be shot. This was not warfare, it was replication. The machinery of genocide had expanded. By the early 1905, the Herero resistance no longer existed as a structured force. What remained were scattered survivors, dehydrated, starved, and traumatized. Some attempted to cross into Bechuanaland, but Germany patrols intercepted many and executed them. Those who made it across were allowed entry only because the British administration refused to participate in the extermination campaign. Families who surrendered were placed in detention camps. This was not mercy, it was the beginning of a new form of control. At this stage, the genocide entered its next phase: forced labor camps, concentration systems, racial science experiments, and total dehumanization. By the mid-1905, German commanders reported to Berlin that the rebellion was over. In their view, the objectives were achieved: lands cleared, cattle seized, populations destroyed, survivors broken, and resistance neutralized. This declaration was not a military summary. It was the announcement that an entire society had been erased from political relevance. Germany proceeded to restructure the colony. Settlers received confiscated land, military farms were established, and African labor became indispensable to economic expansion. The genocide was an uncontrolled spasm of violence. It was a calculated economic transformation. A land without Herero was a land available for German settlement. This logic guided every decision from Berlin to Windhoek. In the early 20th century, global outrage was limited. The world did not yet have the vocabulary of crimes against humanity. Colonial violence was normalized. Reports existed. British officials documented the genocide. Missionaries protested, and some German politicians objected. But Europe largely treated the genocide as an administrative matter. This silence is part of the collapse. A genocide unchallenged becomes precedent. Germany would carry this precedent into the Second Reich, the Weimar era, and eventually the racial science of the Third Reich. The Herero and Nama genocide was not an isolated event, it was a rehearsal. Unlike the Herero, the Nama fought as smaller mobile groups. They used guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and desert knowledge. They prolonged the war longer than German officers expected, but Germany adapted. They built fortified posts, they used scorched earth strategies, and they captured women and children to force male fighters to surrender. Witbooi was killed in 1905, and his death accelerated the collapse of the Nama resistance. By 1907, the Nama population had also been shattered. What happened next? Forced labor, sexual violence, concentration camps, medical experiments belongs to the next chapter of this history. And in our next video, we would find out how all of this played out. But until then, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and check out our channel for similar videos just like this. Thank you, and until next time.